Hello and welcome to our last but not the least presentation of our second day in the Summit of Post-Separation Violence. I am very excited to be welcoming Veronica, and thank you. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
I'm really excited to be here, Charlotte. Thank you. And thank you for the courage it took for you to put this event on.
Yes, I appreciate that. So we have a couple people who are very brave and who have joined all through the day yesterday, all through the day today. I know you're in the Pacific time zone, so for a lot of us in Quebec, it's like 3 hours later, and I think it's wonderful that we can meet this way in virtual format. I was actually in California a couple weeks ago for a networking event. Yes.
What part?
I was in Dana Point. Dana Point is in Southern California. Yeah, I was there for a networking event, and that's one of the that's one of the things that kind of gave me the momentum to also organize the summit, having this experience with businesses and business events. And so why not do the same thing for a cause? If we can promote services, businesses, and products, why not a cause in a way that is easy for people to integrate as well?
Absolutely.
Because they can be in their own environment where they need to be, maybe feel safe or whatever, just comfortable. So I wanted to start by quickly introducing you, and the challenge is that we've met, so we've just met. We're new, contacts actually through networking, through a networking network. And so I'd like to ask you, perhaps if you could tell us in a few words, some of the things I read about were the shame-free zone, that you're a coach, but you also have like training in accompanying people who have experienced domestic violence. So perhaps if you could introduce yourself in a couple words so people know.
I'd be happy to. So my background, I'm not a licensed therapist. I'm a trained domestic violence coach and also an anger management coach. And I also work with sexuality. And I have a private practice in Northern California. And the vast majority of my clients are dealing with some kind of trauma. So oftentimes it's due to violence or sexual assault. And I myself am a survivor of all of that, incest as a child, domestic violence, stalking, post relationship violence.
Yes. Wow. That's a lot to that's a lot of experience.
Yeah. But the thing is, I really bring a lot of hope and joy to this conversation because I've been in recovery from it now for 38 years.
Wow.
And that's my message is always hopeful. It's like we have these challenges, these really big challenges because of an oppressive Western culture, in my opinion. Just the dominant patriarchy has really damaged a lot of us. And a lot of times these things are passed down, the patterns and behaviors are passed down through family. I know my father and mother had a domestic violence marriage. And then, of course, my father also was molesting my sister and I. So just, when you leave a situation like that and you start dating, it's pretty predictable that you're going to gravitate towards people that remind you of your parents and relationship dynamics that remind you of home. And I did. And I took it to a whole new level because drugs and alcohol were involved. So it got really dangerous.
Wow. That's a lot of challenging conditions altogether.
Yeah. But I got sober 38 years ago. And then I just had to deal with the post-relationship violence. So here I was going to 12-step meetings, working a job as a temporary secretary, trying to survive. And I'd look in my rearview mirror and I'd see his Harley Davidson closing in on me.
Wow.
And my heart would practically stop and I didn't know what to do. And I didn't want him to know where I lived, but he somehow or another did trace me to my apartment and broke in one day while I was there. And I didn't know if he had come to kill me or what, but luckily he was there to retrieve his engagement ring. And then but he didn't stop. He didn't stop showing up at my door and my work and coffee shops where I was hanging out. And then eventually he met another woman who would take his abuse, and finally he left my life. But that was luck. It wasn't anything that I did, and it wasn't anything that law enforcement was going to help me with either.
No, I understand that. That's something we talked about. A couple different presentations have brought up that there are actually today, at the moment, there's no recourse to actually stop domestic and post-separation violence in itself, in the sense that we don't have a way to prevent it from happening, because it can happen even when someone is, for example, in prison. There's a lot of cases. We had someone present about in France, like there can continue judicial pressure, and that's all considered violence as well, because financially it can affect the victim. And then, like you said, yes, other factors are around too in our lives happening at the same time. So another thing of what you said that I really appreciate is the aim for hope. And what we want to bring with this summit. It's a difficult topic. A lot of people are not open to talking about it, or they don't even know about it really. And at the same time, there's a lot of hope, because even in the last day and a half or 2 days, we've had a lot of human connections that were really incredible. We've had a lot of hopeful people, and there are solutions, and we believe that there will be a change at some point. But what I'm looking forward to is that you have some tools apparently that we can use for ourselves that are not dependent on whatever the other person does or doesn't do.
I don't believe in putting my future in the hands of people, places, and things. So
people, places, and things.
Okay. I need to be able to find my own peace of mind and my own path. I do need people. I need therapists. Yes. I need support groups. I need colleagues. And I love my clients. It's such a joy and a privilege to pass on the changes that I've been able to make in my own life to them, so their lives can get better, hopefully sooner than mine. I always tell people, I made all these mistakes so you don't have to.
That's what we hope for people, is that it will go faster. One of the things we're talking about is, for example, domestic violence. 70 years ago, I think in a lot of places when it started being even talked about and somehow dealt with. And today there's some progress. I mean, there are shelters. There are some ways to become safer. And so we're hoping, why not do it on purpose for post-separation violence, but let's say faster than 70 years?
Yeah. And one of the things that, I work on with people of all genders. And I want to, right off the bat here, remind us that people of all genders suffer domestic violence and post-separation violence.
Yes.
So that's a really important thing. And sometimes it's more difficult for people who are not identified as female to realize that they're being abused and that they need help and need support.
Well, and a lot of topics that are more generally seen as female or feminine, it's already challenging. But then if someone is not even like in that, like you said, some other gender, then they would have even in a way more challenges. Like even things like starting, like let's say you want to start a nonprofit, and you want to leave your corporate job to start a nonprofit, which is something that's seen as more heart-centered. And so even for a woman, that would be difficult. But for a person who is maybe another gender, that would be even more difficult. So things that are difficult for females or feminine, we're not at that point of servicing everyone the way they need. But we have been having a couple statistics and presenters who reminded us that there are also people other than women who are experiencing domestic violence and post-separation violence. The summit, we presented mostly about women and children. There's also the challenge of the mixed groups, for women who feel unsafe. So that is, but it's a great reminder that you do let us know about that.
It's an important reminder. And also there are some factors that, if you are identified female, are uniquely oppressive because of patriarchy when it comes to a domestic violence situation.
That is true. There are some specific yes.
Yeah. Just the whole victim blaming.
Yes. A lot of the
victim blaming hysterical woman paradigm.
Yes, and the sometimes we have all the guilt, the whole guilt can be, well, it's more even shame. Like that's what I thought it was really good about your what you presented. The shame is something that can completely block. I find a person's maybe their capacities that they have, the qualities that they have, and maybe they would turn to, like you were talking about earlier, maybe substance abuse or other types of behaviors that are not like easy, making it easier for them to make it out of the situation they were in. So that's another thing that happens too.
Yeah. And so I want to introduce a very powerful tool today that I only learned about 7 years ago. So, and like I told you, I've been on this recovery journey for 38 years. So, I got sober, I got into therapy. I worked with a lot of different experts on my own sexual assault and domestic violence recovery. And it was all very valuable. And there's still this, there's a place inside all of us where we have different parts of us that want different things. So, just working with a client in a domestic violence situation this month, got to get out of this situation. Afraid he's going to kill me. Oh, but maybe he'll get better. And in the past, we have tried to tell women in particular, but anybody who's in an abusive situation, that they need to find the courage to leave. And we try to give them pep talks on,
That's true.
Hey, can't you see the patterns? This person's never going to change. These kind of people never change. And when we do that, we are invalidating parts of the person who's suffering. So I use a tool called Internal Family Systems, IFS, that really helps us get connected to all the different parts of us that want different things. And the purpose is not to give all those parts everything they're demanding. Because how could you? If you have a part that wants to leave and one that wants to stay, you can't do both.
No, that
but
is true.
there's a place inside of all of us that is, we call it self in IFS. You might call it your higher self. I like to think of it as kind of the ancient part of you that's been around for a long time and has this access to universal wisdom. However you hold it, the premise is that you have the brilliance, the wisdom, the creativity to figure out your life yourself, but you can't get to it because you've got these polarized parts that are pulling you back and forth with their different agendas. And that's one of the reasons that we sometimes feel incredibly insane. Like 1 minute, we're absolutely positively clear. This person's got a problem and I got to get the hell out of here because my well-being, my very life might depend on it. And then the next minute, it's like, oh, he cried. He said he was sorry. And how can I possibly leave him? He has no one. And I'm the only one that actually gets him. And and he said he was going to kill himself. That was what my ex.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to say, but he's going to kill himself. Exactly. We talked about that.
It is a very standard threat. And it is a form of domestic violence.
Yes, it is.
Threaten to kill yourself if that person leaves you. But how do we work with those parts that have us flip-flopping back and forth? And to me, because I have been on this journey for almost 4 decades, I can tell you this is the most powerful tool that I have discovered to help calm these, what we call polarized parts. You got one part that says leave, one that says stay. They're polarized. They don't agree with each other. You go in, you find those parts, and you find this way to understand them. You really want to bring curiosity and compassion. See, it's actually like an internal exercise where you go in and you locate those parts and you ask them how they, what is it that they're trying to warn you about. So let's, just as an example, we could say the one that says, I want to stay. might be afraid that the children that you share with the abuser are going to have a terrible life without him in their world.
Mm-hmm.
Or it might be ridden with guilt that you're taking his children away from him.
Mm-hmm.
And I apologize for using stereotypical gender terms, but it's just a little easier than constantly referring to gender neutrality. But
it's what we've been
whatever,
doing in this event,
whatever the
because
gender of
the
your listeners
majority,
and
yes,
viewers right now, I just want to assure them I am including everybody
it
in
is
this.
for everyone, yes, but we
Yeah.
are talking probably majority and about the statistically more probable victims, but we are trying
It
to repeat
tends to
that it's
be,
for everyone.
and some of the more severe forms of domestic violence are usually perpetrated by people that are identified as male.
Yes.
So that part is feeling afraid, actually. And if we don't actually address its fears, maybe, oh, I'm too old, I'll be alone for the rest of my life, or I don't want to start over again, or I've gone this far with him, and why give up now? Or he said he'd change and I really believe him this time, or whatever. So then you have this other part that's like saying, no, we got to get out of here. And usually in a domestic violence situation, that part's making a pretty good case. But it can be very extreme. So it might also be ridiculing you for being stupid and naive. It might be telling you that you just don't know how to pick men. It might tell you that you've wasted all these years. And then when that happens, there's parts of you that want to shrink away from that and go, no, I haven't wasted all this time. And I'm not stupid. So it's real complex in there. And I'd actually I don't know if I have the capacity to share screen here, but
yes,
I would like to share a graphic just to show your whoops, let me bring up the right one. Show your viewers a little graph that kind of helps explain. So, okay. So I'm just gonna point to it. Hopefully you can you see
yes,
my
I see the
okay.
image.
So you can see in the middle we've got self. This is and in a minute I'm going to show you a list of the qualities of self. This is a really beautiful place to be when you're in self, because it's really calm and confident. But a lot of us, especially if we are being subjected to a lot of traumatic abuse, don't have the luxury of being in self most of the time. Instead, we are running around here between managers and firefighters, and managers and firefighters are considered the protectors. And what they are protecting are the exiles. So the exiles are the parts of us that we used to refer to in the 80s as inner child. So the inner child is very vulnerable, very young, very, we want to protect them. We don't want anything bad to happen to them. So managers and firefighters come in to protect the exiles. And this usually starts at an early age. And, there's probably going to be people in this symposium who do not identify as having had abuse in their early childhood. But the fact is that epigenetics has shown us that trauma actually travels through the DNA for 7 generations. So if anybody in your family going back 7 generations suffered a rape or a war or famine or imprisonment or domestic violence or, the Holocaust, any of those kind of traumas, they will be in your DNA. So I think it's kind of safe to assume that all of us are dealing with one level or another of trauma. Some of us have bigger trauma burdens than others. I myself, because of all the trauma I've lived through, was diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Some people have just traumas about one particular event in their life, like a car wreck or a plane crash. But those of us who've had repeated exposure to relationship trauma tend to suffer the most, because we're social animals. We need each other. So those exiles form in our childhood. And, maybe the parents are just abandoning, maybe they're shaming, but it starts to split us off from ourselves. And managers are that's that logical voice inside you that always has great solutions for everything and has it all mapped out and kind of on a time level, and it can be efficient. Maybe it gets you to work, it gets you through college. Firefighters use a different approach to protect you, and it tends to be addictive or avoidant. So they may avoid a situation, try to run away from it, or they might avoid thinking about it by indulging a food addiction, or maybe drinking a little too much or smoking a little too much pot, something that kind of takes us out of the feelings so we don't have to experience them. And sometimes they do other things too, like become verbally abusive. And also they could become violent. So one of the things about when we start looking at these parts, we start to see that the abuser also has these parts. And the reason that I really want to highlight this is because I think anybody who's been in an intimate relationship with an abuser has experienced the vulnerable young parts of them. And that was oftentimes what we fell in love with. Then, because they haven't gotten any help for their trauma, they bring out the firefighters. And the minute they think they're going to get cut off from their source of affection or compliance, the person they're controlling in order to feed their own narcissistic deficit, the firefighters come out and they will do almost anything and become very destructive. So if we're looking at people in that sense, we can start to actually validate ourselves. Okay, yeah, I fell in love with the sweet part, but this part is probably going to kill me.
That's a very good way to sum it up. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I'm going to stop share for just a minute and see before I want to bring up a slide that actually says, what does self bring us? But before I do that, if anybody's got any questions, or Charlotte, if you want to ask me a few questions about that.
Well, what I'm getting at, while you were presenting, I was reading the slide that you showed, and it just seems like it's so complete. Like I imagine that you have, and there's so much that could be talked about in that, all that information in that slide. I mean, just the shape itself too. I'm very sensitive to geometry, and one of the things I remember, as a scientist, there were some articles that were showing that they had found, I think it was physical signs. If I remember, I'd have to find the article, but I think it was in a woman's body. They had found, I think it was in her vaginal cells. There was some kind of physical proof of effects of trauma from her mother, that her mother had experienced sexual assault or something. And there was so what you were talking about, the DNA, well, DNA has physical expressions. So I have heard that there are some physical expressions of that carrying the DNA from previous trauma. So,
I'm a nerd. If you ever locate that research, please send me
I will, because
I would love it.
It's been coming back to me, especially when you're talking about the previous family. I have a very intuitive side also. So the other things that you shared about really speak to me, and I also have the scientific side. So I like to find ways so that everybody can be impacted by what's being shared. So yeah, I'll try to find that article and share it.
Yeah, please do. Yeah. So and it's true. I mean, my mother is an incest survivor. My father is an incest survivor.
Wow.
So yeah, and now I am. It's so sad. And I think, when we get help to recover, and I've pursued it very aggressively. I've been in therapy most of the last 38 years. And to me, that's not a sign of how messed up I am. It's a sign of how much I value living a vibrant, full, abundantly connected, joyful life.
Yeah, well, isn't it something that was missing perhaps when you were in a violent relationship and in a post-separation relationship? You probably weren't being followed by a therapist, a coach, a mentor, or, those interactions can actually be a way of actually living to our full potential.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. We can't do it alone.
I don't know if
We
I
all
said
need some
coach,
kind of
but
help.
I meant to say coach too, because that's also what you
Yeah.
do.
A
Yeah.
coach, counselor, therapist, whatever, wherever. My first therapist was actually a Catholic priest, and I'm not even Catholic, but he was a really good therapist, and always be grateful to him. So wherever your intuition guides you to get support, just make sure that those people are really charting a healthy path, and if they know something about domestic violence and post-separation violence, that's a real plus.
Yes, I think it's really important to choose the people that we'll be interacting with that will help us, because one thing that we've discovered as well in our research that we've done over the last 15 years, my husband and myself and the other people that we spoke with, was that sometimes you can have secondary violence, which is through maybe institutions or professionals who are not trained or who are, I don't know, using their personal judgment or something, and it can actually make things worse. And when the victim or the survivor or the actually maybe not yet thriver is getting help from those people, well, it can actually maybe slow things down, or she's not maybe ready for exerting the limits perhaps that weren't there when she was in the domestic violence relationship. So
It's
yeah,
so
it's very
true. I
important.
mean, for me, when I was getting sober in 85, I think it was about 87 that I went to try to report a rape that had happened about 3 years before, and pretty well got laughed out of the police station.
That's very
So,
unfortunate to know that happened.
well, and things have changed, but they change because we work for that change. I
Yes.
myself have worked to change rape laws here in California.
Wow,
Not
that's good to know.
not through legislation. That has really been through colleagues of mine that have worked their butts off, but by being willing to be the rape survivor who goes into the mayor's office to do a deposition, who insists on being heard,
Oh,
and takes it to the television and radio.
that's really important. I think one of the things that some victims have told us that we've heard is that sometimes it can seem like an injustice that it's victims who are moving to move things around, but in a way, it's what it is. Yeah, that's what it
It
is.
is what it is. It is
Yes.
what it is. Yeah.
So I think after what you shared with us, you said you had something else that you wanted
I
to.
would love to, yeah, at this point now, what I'd like to do is share the qualities of self, which are will hopefully make it clear, so that we call these the 8 C's of internal family systems.
Mm,
Um, so one of the beliefs in IFS is that when we embody self-energy, we're going to be characterized by these 8 C's. Now, when I first started working with an IFS therapist 7 years ago, I'm like, I don't think I have a self. All I felt like I had were firefighters and managers. So, and they were working pretty well for me. They built me a career and located a better man than the one that I had left. And I was living, I thought a pretty comfortable life, but I still had all of these dysfunctional patterns inside me. And then as we started to pull, go inside and find the managers, find the firefighters, and get to know them so that they would relax, I gradually discovered, oh, there's self. Oh, I haven't seen self since I was 4.
oh.
And it was so beautiful to reconnect with that beautiful self energy that I did have when I was 4, but which was taken away from me by the time I turned 6, and my father abused me.
Mm.
So the characteristics that 4-year-old have are characteristics that I have now, all these years later. And I have to tell you, to me, that's why I refer to this as this ancient wise part that we all have. And when I'm working with my clients, my goal is always to get them connected to their own wisdom.
Mm.
So, it's a calm place. Self doesn't like have an agenda, like I have to prove my point, or I need to convince you. And we do want these other parts. We want managers. We do need the firefighters too. Now, I prefer that my firefighters only come out if I'm being chased by a bear or somebody's holding a gun to my
Yes.
head.
Yes, because they are effective. They're just
They
not.
are, and
Yeah.
I need them. I need them. My survival depends on them. But as a trauma victim, I can just be in a state of constantly trying to survive, as if I
Yes.
am constantly
Mhm.
under threat. And what I want is to calm my nervous system so I don't have autoimmune and all these high adverse
Yes.
child
Mhm.
effects that are negatively impact one's health. Um, yeah. So clarity. Once the system becomes calm, I get clarity. And I get more curious about what's happening around me and about other people. I wonder why they're doing that. I also, when I start to open those doors of curiosity, become compassionate. Now I want to clarify. I've been working on codependent enabler
Mm.
patterns for decades, and compassion isn't that. Compassion isn't even empathy. I actually am very empathic. Just before you and I started this interview today, I got tears in my eyes because of something you were telling me. And I love my empathy, but it's really important, if you're going to have clarity and confidence in a situation, to stick with the compassion. The compassion is more, it has better boundaries, I think. When I become empathetic, I can kind of blend with the other person. I can kind of
Mhm.
take over into their pain and forget that I have my own pain and I need to take care of me. And
Yes.
I know that in the abusive relationships that I've been in, I would often do that. I'd feel so sorry for him and I'd forget about me. So compassion isn't about sacrifice, and it's not even about forgiveness. It's just, oh, look at that person. They're suffering, and I'm sorry that they are.
Well, it seems like compassion would include ourselves and perhaps even the all without the separation in a way. Whereas when we're empathetic, it seems we might forget ourselves in a way, and it's not the best way to perhaps make decisions that would be beneficial to ourselves or even to everyone.
That's
Mhm.
a distinction like that has merits. I think each of us has to kind of fill in to see how it operates inside of us. I know for me, empathy feels like a little more merging.
Yes, it's
So
like a
it's
fusion
it's
kind of
not so
thing.
much that
Hmm.
I'm not there anymore as I just don't have a boundary.
That's true. It's kind of like a fusional. That's why you were talking about more. It could lead to it could lead to codependency depending on what you have in place.
And
As far as
I'm
your limits.
mostly thinking about this in terms of an
Hmm.
intimate relationship.
Yes. Hmm.
So it's kind of like I fell in love with his vulnerable little exiles, and I have so much empathy for them that I can't abandon them because I know how much they're hurting. Um, yes, and if it goes way over into codependency, I don't exist anymore. It's just
Yes.
I'm a
Mm.
caretaker. But it doesn't. My empathy doesn't always go over there. Sometimes I use it very well as a coach, and it can have boundaries, but I have to have managers that are kind of monitoring it.
Yes, empathy can have its place. So especially when you're, for example, if you're coaching or assisting someone, then or
Yeah.
even being there for a friend or whatever, I think there is a distinction between empathy and compassion, and empathy has its place for sure.
So with compassion, one of the things that helps me is to think about world leaders. If there's a world leader that you find in your worldview is creating a lot of havoc and destruction and pain, maybe even death on the world plane. And if you have judgments about that person and you would like to see them removed from that powerful position, or maybe they're not, I don't know, it could be a government leader, it could be somebody who is some kind of a leader, just, in social media, whatever your belief system is, tap into that for a minute and see if you could like have compassion for how they might have been traumatized as a child and how life has shaped them. In those moments, for me at least, I'm real clear on my boundaries. I'm going to vote them out of office. I want them to not have that power. There's no part of me that wavers on that. Oh, we'll give them a second chance.
Yes. What about the vulnerable child? You know, the exiles or the
but I might be able to find a place in me that says, well, I hope that they get help or learn maybe better luck in their next lifetime. Whatever your belief system.
Yes, there's a way to frame it for sure.
Yeah, and that has more boundaries for me. And what I like about the compassionate view is that it keeps me out of resentment and judgment. And trust me, I'm not there all the time. I do have resentment and judgments, but when I tap into that place, I feel so much more whole. So much, and I have a lot of clarity, and I definitely have clear boundaries. The founder of IFS, his name is Richard Schwartz, and he was asked about a given political leader who some people feel has created a lot of destruction. He says, well, what about him? Do you think he has childhood trauma? And he goes, absolutely. And he must be stopped. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So that's my idea of compassion. Confidence comes from this place. And I don't think there's any accident that they put the confidence after compassion in this list, because I noticed for myself that when I step out of enabling and codependency and I just reside in that place of compassion, I feel very confident that I will do what's best for me and the bigger picture. I have access to a lot more wisdom at that point.
That's true.
And then we've got the courage and creativity to actually make our decisions stick and make them happen. I love when I'm coaching clients and I get them to this place where they're able to calm down their firefighters and their managers, and they go into self, and then they just know what they should do and what they're going to do. And they do it because the courage is right there. It's right there. But you can't get to it when all these other parts of you are terrified and struggling to protect you. And that's, I don't expect you to take my word for it. It sounds a little bit like, really? But I would encourage people to explore this. And in a minute, I'll bring up another graphic that'll show you how, and give you very specific steps on how to go in and get to know those firefighters and managers so that you can experience this. And ultimately, connection is what we all want, right? So that's the eighth quality, is we are connected. And we've got access to more joy and more love. So I'm going to stop my share here. Do you want me to leave it up for your questions, or because I like
well, we could leave it up for a bit. There was just something that was coming up about connection. Connections is something that I personally thrive on, and I feel that sometimes perhaps there is a confusion between connections and what we were talking about earlier, codependency. It can be because the thriving on connections, a lot of the people who have been victims of domestic violence and post-separation violence, even though it can happen to anyone, but there are some qualities that are often that well, the empathy, the compassion may be more present in those people, but sometimes it can be in the form of the codependency. So but it feels like connection to the person who's not aware of it. So that can be a challenge to see it when you're so in such a vulnerable state of being abused.
Yes, it becomes clear what real connection looks like when you calm down all the parts.
That's true.
As long as we've got these wounded, exiled parts, they're going to look for dysfunctional connection because they've got unmet needs, and they're very young. They don't actually know what a healthy relationship looks like because they didn't have that present when they were little. And I know I'm talking about different parts of us as if they were different people. In some ways they are, just a little bit. They have their own agendas and personalities. And it's a trip when you go inside and you meet all these different parts of yourself. The more traumatized you are, the more distinct they are, and the more they're sometimes kind of separate. The goal of IFS is to get more integrated so that all those parts are, we call it on the bus, but self is driving the bus. So
Okay.
that wiser part of ourselves is in charge, but the parts that are afraid or have different agendas get to kind of tap us on the shoulder and say, hey, don't forget that thing, remember?
Yes, that's good. Like a family bus. Well,
Yeah.
a functional family, healthy family bus.
Yeah. So in one sense, we're talking about connection to all the parts of you.
That's a good point. Its connections are not just with other people. It's within ourselves as well. We know with the different parts of what you were saying. So
I really think, Charlotte, that connection to self is a powerful antidote to codependency, because I know for myself, a lot of times it's just like this discontent and emptiness inside would drive me to accept abusive and dysfunctional relationships with other people, because I don't know how to do that for me.
that is a good point. Yeah, that's true. Without the connection to self, or with it being maybe perhaps not at its highest potential, there can be kind of like a binging on other elements that can give a sense of perhaps connection, but it's not really the the real deal.
Yeah, it quiets the fear for a minute, like, oh, I'm not going to get abandoned after all, and yet
Yeah.
the person that's abandoning you the most is you.
Exactly. That's really so perhaps some of these that you're teaching us, if we could have learned those, maybe been in touch with them, because like you said, we probably know it somewhere inside of ourselves, but if we're not in touch with it, perhaps before we meet the people who are abusers, then we're not able to have that connection in place for ourselves, and so it makes things less clear.
And the thing is that we should not have known all this stuff when we're little. It'd be great if the people around us were modeling it, but there's no failure on our part at all. We absorbed the soup we grew up in.
Yes, of course.
Whatever kind of parents we had, whatever kind of religion we were or were not raised with, whatever kind of teachers and peers we were, either blessed or subjected to, those things all take place within the dominant culture. And in my view, the dominant culture is toxic.
Yes, I believe that too. My husband and I were talking about how probably everybody is somewhat traumatized in the first couple of years of their lives because of the whole, actually the environment. Yeah.
Oh, especially now, my God, between the natural disasters and whatever's happening to democracy, I think a lot of us are feeling a lot of fear.
Yes, that's true. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So to be kind and compassionate to us and realize that we did the best we could. And if you're looking at this stuff and you are shifting things inside you and you are saying the abuse stops here with me, I'm not carrying it forward, I'm not going to stay in an abusive situation that then causes my children to also be attracted to abusive relationships.
Mm-hmm.
All of that stuff is really, it's a powerful form of activism.
Yes, it's a way. It actually is, when we're talking about how there's no recourse to stop the violence. Well, actually, there possibly may be by what we can do inside of ourselves too, and not to bring up that we would be responsible for the other person's actions. So it's something we tried to be careful about in this summit. We talked about impossible forgiveness or possible forgiveness. There's a couple of topics that we wanted to be very sensitive to our viewers, that we're not saying, you have to do this or you have to do that, but to be able to be connected to ourselves, for sure, it can make things, possibly better for the situation.
Yeah. And I mean, for myself in my own journey, as I recovered from the standpoint of victim, I got to start looking at how I needed to clean up my act as somebody who also perpetrated. And I think there's ways in which we can become accustomed to certain behaviors being okay or normal. And I've got a really high standard about what qualifies as domestic violence. So when I'm working with clients, I throw this term around and they're like, we don't have domestic violence. And I go, well, let's see, has your partner ever tried to leave a conversation and you stood in front of them and insisted that they listen to you?
Mm.
Did you ever slam the door and never start the conversation up again or refuse to talk to them? That's stonewalling.
Yes, of course.
So
Those are present as well.
they are.
Exactly. Yeah, they are very a lot of the actions that we talk about in domestic violence are present. I think one of the distinctions that some are trying to put is that the fact that it's a repetitive coercive control. However, those actions would always be in a way controlling to the other person.
They are. And one of the things that I try to do with my clients is to help them clean up the behaviors that they're doing that don't qualify legally as any kind of on a form of perpetration.
Yes, you won't be able to file a report for that, I don't think.
But no. But will register in their brain as a way of somehow or another, I'm in this with them. I'm participating in it with them. Some people feel guilty or ashamed. Well, I wasn't very nice either. And it's like, well, I'm not interested in making my clients nice. I could care less. But what I would like to do is free them. And that kind of toxicity really bonds us together. We're stuck in it together at that point. So just like disengaging and going, no, you know what? I'm not going to yell. I'm not going to name call. I'm not going to threaten. I'm just going to watch. What is it? And then you can actually get more clarity about, oh my God, look at what's happening. Sometimes I do want to say not engaging can arouse even more rage. I have experienced that firsthand. So I have a part of a protective firefighter who will fawn. And I'm here to say that sometimes my fawning has saved my life because that took the form of praising the perpetrator so that they would calm down and not hurt me. And if you are conscious that that's what you're doing, that's one thing. If this is how you operate, you're stuck. And good luck getting out.
Yes, that's true. There are some behaviors that are destructive in the victims or in the people who are experiencing violence as well.
Yeah. I fawned with a serial rapist, and I'm very, very glad that I did because 3 weeks later, he stabbed a girl in the face with a knife. He was a violent human being. I didn't have any proof of that at the time, but my gut just told me, comply, tell him what he wants to hear, make him feel good about himself, and maybe he'll get out of here alive. So
that is, I guess, unfortunate that you had that, reflex or, like you said, if we can use something consciously sometimes, but when they become a behavior.
All of these behaviors, freezing, fawning, fighting, fleeing, those 4 come from the amygdala, the part of your brain that we call reptilian brain. It's all about survival, and it's all there for a good reason. And which brings me to the fact that the parts are there for a good reason. We're not wanting to shame them or dismiss them or make them go away. We just want to get to know them better so that they will calm down enough to allow us to come from that place that's confident and has clarity and can make some sound decisions. Like, okay, sure, I have a part that doesn't want to take his children away from him. And I have a part that doesn't want to separate my children from their father. And then I have this other part that is saying, oh my God, if you stay much longer, he's going to put you in the hospital. Or even if he doesn't, what kind of a life is this? And your children are going to normalize that and then perhaps wind up in abusive relationships
Mm-hmm.
themselves. So how do I listen to both of those parts with compassion and curiosity so that they calm down? And then as self, I'll have clarity. Maybe today I need to nod my head and say, yep, you're right, just so I can get through the day in one piece, but start making my escape plan for how I'm going to get the hell out of this
Definitely. Yes,
situation.
yes, maybe a good idea. Yeah, exactly. To
Yeah.
deal with both. Yeah, there are ways to consciously do that once you're aware of it. Yeah.
So I'm going to share screen one last time here. And what I'm going to show you is the actual formula for how this works to go find the firefighters and the managers who are making it impossible for you to get enough clarity and confidence to move forward with the thing you need to do. So just remember again, we had that diagram that showed we had managers, we got firefighters. That's usually where we're going. At some point, when you get past them, you can start working with exiles. But for the purposes of today, I'm just going to talk about how to interact with the managers and the firefighters. And the first thing we want to do is we find them. So let's say I mean, this is very easy for me to just model this. I went to, I can go back to what part of me decided to stay in a domestic violence situation for 2 years. And I can tell you that that part had a lot of investment in being loved. My father had ridiculed me and scapegoated me most of my life. And I felt ugly. I felt unwanted. I felt abandoned. And I met this man who was absolutely head over heels in love with me and never, ever missed a day to tell me so. So I'm getting this supply of love bombing, really. And I'm eating it up. And it's not because I'm vain. It's because I'm just so desperate to feel like somebody actually adores me.
Mm-hmm.
And so he sometimes acts out and does things my dad used to do. I don't even know that, there can be a better life or that there should be a better life. I promised myself I'd never let a man treat me like my father treated my mother and me, but here I am, and maybe that's all there is. So that part's kind of justifying the abuse, because the moments where I feel love bombed are just so powerful. I feel like I need them. So right there, I have found that part. And what I've been doing here is focusing on it. I've been getting some idea of what it is like. And when I flesh it out, I can hear what it's saying, which are all the things that I just told you. It's saying, no, you may never be loved like this again. You can't leave. And when I start to feel towards that part, I am going to ask it. Well, first thing I have to do is I have to ask myself, how do I feel about this part? Because I've done a lot of work with IFS, I feel a lot of compassion for this part. And I also feel appreciative of it. Before that part surfaced, I was really just ripping through relationships without ever falling in love. As a matter of fact, just before I fell in love with this man, I'd lived for 2 years with a guy that I did not love, just because it was convenient. And I got bored, and eventually he left because of my drinking. And I was so sad because I got abandoned, but I wasn't sad about losing him. And that was just a really cold place that I lived. Falling in love was like becoming human. So I appreciate this part. And if you had taken me to that moment when I realized, oh my God, I have this part that can't leave because it's in love with my abuser, I would have hated it.
Mhm.
I would have thought, how dare you humiliate me, degrade me, and pull me down into the same nonsense my parents did. I hate this part. As soon as I'm not having compassion for the part, that's another part. So then I can turn my attention to that part and start to get some sense of, okay, I hear you hate that part. Tell me about it. It's real complex. As one of my clients says, he says, it's very complicated in there.
Yes.
So whichever part you're focusing on, you befriend it. You start to find out how it got its job. And I just explained to you how this part got its job, because it saw me living a life that had absolutely no depth or love to it. And it wanted me to feel love in my heart. And I did. And so that's how I befriended that part. Well, thank you. I get why you did that. And we need to stop doing it.
Yes, exactly.
But how am I going to get that part to relax? It's got fears. Well, if I was back then, the fear that that part would have is, oh, we're going to go back to you being dead inside. Is that what we're doing? And I would have to probably tell it, yeah, you know, that's all I really know how to do. So that might be the case for a while, but it's better than being dead on the outside. And I'm going to learn. I actually go to my parts and I tell them I'm in therapy and I'm working on this and I'm going to get better at the thing that you're afraid I'll keep doing for the rest of our life. And I'm going to learn to not do it. So that's how I address those fears. Everybody does this just a little bit different because we all have different parts. But I do coach a lot of people with very similar process to what I do. And oh my God, the transformation in their lives is just amazing. And so I feel huge appreciation for Richard Schwartz for developing this. He really had to go up against the psychology, the world of psychologists to birth this new paradigm. So anyway, I'm going to stop share and ask, you know, are there any questions? I'm delivering a lot here today. I just kind of gave you the whole IFS thing, which really you're not going to get a true sense of until you experience it.
Yes, I understand. It's kind of like an introduction or even a teaser, yeah. But a very valuable, content rich one. So one of the questions, I mean, I know you didn't actually even, you mentioned it, but you didn't bring it up in depth, and it wasn't something that was part of the topic anyway, but it's also a topic we haven't had a presentation about. We don't have a presenter presenting about it, but you talked about sexuality too. And sexuality is, I mean, most of the women and probably others also who experience domestic violence, and even in post-separation violence too, there can be sexual violence. It can be like direct sexual violence, or all kinds of, just different things, like using, I don't know, what is it called, like things that people know from another person that you've had sex with before. They could do a little something that you would recognize, and then, visually or something, or there's ways to use it against a victim of post-separation violence by the abuser. And so sexuality is actually a big part of the challenge. And the other thing is, I read that, I can't remember the statistic, but there is a higher chance, higher probability, or a higher percentage of men anyway who sexually abuse their children among those who are violent with their spouse.
Yeah, that's another statistic I would really like to see, Charlotte.
Yes, and actually yesterday, Barry Goldstein, which was one of our presenters, he brought that up as well. And I had never heard of that until this year. I didn't even know about that. I mean, we should be telling that to all women who are leaving a domestic violence situation, that you may want to be on the lookout for the signs, because you could miss it. So, or have whatever any kind
Yeah,
of.
I mean, I get one of the things that happens a lot of times is that parents will say, "Well, why didn't my child tell me? We could talk about anything." And it's like the very nature of being molested when you're a child is it's predicated on secrecy.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then it's very dangerous for the child to go to the other parent and tell them what's happening, because oftentimes the parent is invested in thinking that they know what's happening. So, and they may have a pattern of invalidating the child around certain things, like
Hmm.
it's just a bad dream, you misunderstood.
Exactly.
Um,
Yes,
there's
there's
nothing.
a high level of denial of incest in particular. And
Yeah.
that's why I was saying that. I mean, I'm not necessarily always in agreement that this is part of sexuality in itself, but it has an effect on sexuality. As in, what I mean is that those are not actual, like, those are not like lovemaking acts. Those are aggressions, and those are assaults. And so,
I think
yeah.
one of the things that's important to know is that, part of the Stockholm syndrome, of course, is to um, put your own reality to the side and adopt the perpetrator's reality, identify with them, take
Hmm.
on their worldview. And if they are making love to you and saying, "I adore you, I love you, I couldn't live without you, and I'll never hurt you again," and all that, it can be really intoxicating. Um, and also that it's just, and by the way, I should just remind your viewers, I'm a certified sexologist and I teach sexuality. So some of the things that happen are, first of all, the the abuse is normalized because it's also presented with all of this sexual passion.
Hmm.
And so
That's true.
you've got a very
Hmm.
potent cocktail of hormones
Hmm.
streaming through your system. 1 minute you're really afraid, and
Hmm.
the next minute you're relieved.
Yes. Kind of
That
like a
that
roller coaster or up and
yes,
down type of feeling.
and that can really it can really destabilize you and make it very difficult for you to even know what's real anymore.
Hmm.
And the other thing is that there's a lot of women who are not in domestic violence situations who are tolerating unwanted, uncomfortable touch from their
That's
partner.
true. That's true too. Yes.
So
Hmm.
when you happen to be in an abusive relationship, there's even a higher incidence of
Hmm.
tolerating unwanted touch, uncomfortable positions, penetration that hurts, um, hoping that it'll just be over soon.
Hmm.
And so be on the lookout for both of those extremes. One being that the emotional, physical cocktail of having sex somehow or another removes all of the fear and anxiety that just preceded it.
Hmm.
And the
That's
other
true.
being
Hmm.
that you're tolerating and enduring and thinking, well, this is better than getting hit.
That's exactly what I was going to mention. That for some victims, what I've heard is that it seems crazy because it's so harmful. Sexual assault is so harmful. It's so destructive. However, if it feels to the victim in that moment that they're avoiding something else that may seem
Yeah.
more scary at that moment. For example, being assaulted by someone else, or there's so many possibilities that it's just like during that time the person's busy, the assaulter, the abuser,
Yeah.
so they can't be doing something else during that time, harming the children, or I mean, there are, I guess there are
Well,
extreme possibilities, but I
well,
mean, yeah,
yes. And I remember as a child when my parents had had a romantic night the night before, they were really flirtatious and happy the next morning
exactly.
because those endorphins, the oxytocin is still coursing through your
Exactly.
bloodstream. So it can actually create a few days of bliss.
Hmm. Exactly. There are reasons why, people who experience those sexual assaults and rape, etc. There are all these different complex, reasons to have that varying experience of what it is. And I just wanted to bring up sexuality for a few minutes because I know that's one of your part of your expertise, and we don't
Well,
have
one of the
anybody
things,
presenting on that. So,
Charlotte, one of the things I want to make sure that all your viewers know is that regardless of whether they think the sexual interactions with their partner is abusive or not, be on the lookout for any part of you that feels like you can't speak freely about your preferences. Like that you're not in the mood, or you would rather just cuddle, or that particular position doesn't attract you or turn you on. It's very difficult to have boundaries around sex, and that is something I specialize in teaching. And I teach it to people who are not in abusive relationships, because nobody seems to know how to do this. And people are, well, I don't want to hurt his feelings, or I don't want to, I want it to be passionate and carefree and spontaneous, and I don't want to talk about it. I just want it to happen. And, he should know, he should just figure that out. And I mean, there's all kinds of scripts that people are running around this. But the important thing to know is, if you are tolerating any kind of sexual touch that you don't like, here's what's happening. Your body is numbing out. And over time, sex will lose its appeal. You'll probably have less of a libido. You won't find your partner as attractive. And even if it's not an abusive relationship and you really love this person dearly, the fact that you've been enduring unwanted or uncomfortable or unpleasant touch for 20 years, it's going to ruin your sex life.
That's true. I mean, and that would be something that would be possible even and for anybody of any, also of other, all genders too. But like you said, there were some specificities to, the female or women, but that would be something that would be also outside of abusive relationships as well. And that's why I just wanted to bring up the sexuality. I knew that was something that you had expertise on, and it's something that is so present in all of these situations that we've talked about actually over the last day and a half or 2 days. And of course, we can't cover it extensively, and we also have triggers for viewers, and we've been talking about different ways to deal with that. I'm sure you would have maybe some tools for us as well, but we were thinking of making perhaps a like a digital I don't know, caretaking, some kind of,
Yes. Well, I have a full color brochure, or it's actually an ebook, and it's called The Exquisite Partnership Formula. And you can get it over at my website, theshamefreezone.com. And all you have to do is just put in your email, and you can download it. And it has 5 steps to saying your truth while you're having sex.
Wow, that's another topic I was going to talk about, is the while during is actually probably more challenging for most people on the planet, and people don't want to talk about that.
It is, and it's the only way to roll.
It is because things are happening in the moment. Like, would you eat a whole meal that you don't like, and then you tell the other person, well, I don't actually eat cheese because it makes me sick, and then you've just eaten the whole,
Well, I've developed this 5-step process. I feel like it's a more feminine way to have a boundary. And when I say more feminine, I don't mean more woman-like. I just mean more feminine, because everything's so masculine in the dominant culture. So by more feminine, I mean it's more attuned to connection. And sustaining the heart connection and keeping the passion moving, so that the feedback that you're giving is just like so attractive and inviting, that what you've actually done when you asserted this sexual boundary was created more passion.
Exactly, it does. It's my husband and I, we were so we married, and I've been married for several years now. We're so different. And we weren't attracted chemically. It was very much of a like more of a spiritual or connection or whatever, but it wasn't like a instant connection, chemistry type of thing. And so and we both had previous experiences that we wanted to modify. So we experienced more with like conscious, like you said, talking all the time. It gets really weird and awkward. It doesn't look like anything you see in the movies, anything you imagine or think that it should be, but it's so incredible. And isn't that the way we would want to live all of our lives, like consciously? So it's like you said, yes, so what you're saying really speaks to me. It's something that it probably brings back to the self as well, because if you can be in that space, I don't know if you call it a space, but like self during that time of your life that's so intimate and so powerful, probably you can make an impact on like the whole planet.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if so my partner is also in IFS therapy, so we
Wow.
we get to bring that to our romance. It's pretty
Yeah.
intoxicating.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you so much for going into that for part
Yeah,
of the time.
thank you for
Yes,
asking.
I just wanted to remember to speak about that because you did have that in in the literature and your documentation, and I do know it can be triggering too for our viewers. So we didn't have an in-depth session about that, but they can go to your website and get a tool to help them work through it. So we can
Absolutely.
make
And
sure that
one
they
thing
have
about
that.
this boundary, this feminine way to set a boundary is that I've used it actually in group settings where I was coaching renters and the landlord. So
Mhm.
it doesn't have, you can actually
Exactly.
use it when you're talking to your children. It doesn't have to be in the bedroom. It's
Of
just,
course,
it
of
works really
course.
well there.
Of course. Well, I think probably, I mean, human connections are probably the same wherever it is virtually, in person, in your intimate life. There's these things that, are just, universal and probably make things better if we can communicate and connect about
True.
them. So I wanted to thank you. I mean, I don't know if you had anything else to add before we finish off.
I think it's time for me to go. I would just if we've got a way to have that link to my free gift, I'd love for people to know how to be able to
Yes, yes.
sign up and get the blog. And I've got YouTube's on a whole YouTube channel. It's on the website.
Yes, for
So
sure. The people will have access to a link, and we'll
yeah.
have also we're going to make a resource guide and a future virtual resource center. So we'll
Okay.
be for sure connecting priority with our presenters from this event. I really appreciate that you jumped in to present and that you have so much to bring. And we will be sharing this video with our audience, and people will have access to it after the event as well. And it will be translated into French too, because a good part of our audience is Francophone. That's also why some of them are not on, because the majority of people in Quebec speak only French. So
Well, I'm just gonna
yeah.
have to watch that version because my last name is French and I don't speak a word of it.
That's what some people told me. Some people say, well, she has a French name. I was like, well, yeah, I guess.
Oh yeah, well,
Anyway, so
Americans.
we'll have a transcript of the English video, and then we'll also have a transcript of the French translation. So you'll have both, and you'll be able
This is
to go over it.
great. This is great.
So
And if you want those slides, the IFS slides, they
mhm.
come up on the screen, obviously, but I'm happy to share those too. So just
Yeah,
let me
that could be
know.
helpful because we could also translate
Yeah.
and share those with people as well. So yeah. Thank
Charlotte,
you.
thank you for putting
Yeah,
this
I
on.
appreciate it very much. So we'll
Yeah.
see everyone in the morning at 9:30 a.m. Eastern for the welcome call, and then we'll have some more presentations. And again, much gratitude to you, and take care, everyone. We'll be back tomorrow, and I hope everybody has a great rest of their day. Thank you.
Bye for now.